I think a lot of us have toxic money behaviors we don't realize.
It's funny how taboo it is.
Our instincts that keep us alive, that have helped us survive, have no place with money.
What do you think the number one thing is that people are doing wrong today with their money management?
Honestly, the biggest thing is
Jess, thank you so much for being here. And you are a returning guest, which is really, really special because you were one of our first ever guests in season 1.
Was that a long time
That was
ago?
like 4 years ago.
That's miles. That was so long ago.
And you have been doing so much since then. You have an amazing new book, Everything But Money.
Yeah.
And you just have continued to be such a source of amazing and reassuring financial information for Canadians and the world. So thank you for being here and for what you do.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited to be back.
Yay. Your book is amazing. It's such a psychology deep dive into money.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to talk about it because you had a lot of really interesting approaches that I haven't really seen coupled with money. And I think that most people who are struggling with money right now, they want a hot tip for how to just do one little thing and it'll change all of their finances. But it really is a mindset game and a mindset shift. And so I want to start with some of the key emotions that you identify in your book. You talk about guilt, fear, anxiety, envy, and despair. And I'd love to hear more about how those core emotions can inform how we deal with money.
So we're going to start with a book. And I completely agree. Everyone's just tell me one thing that'll change my life. I'm like, if it was that easy, I'd be a billionaire.
Yes, correct.
I'd be selling something.
I'd be sending me to space.
I'd be sending me to space. Oh God, no. I have no desire. That sounds terrifying.
Problematic.
Yeah, and problematic. Anyways, but no, I really wanted to, this whole book is really a guidebook on how to better understand your relationship with money, which isn't something that people necessarily ever think about. They think of money as dollars and cents, or it's an action or a behavior that I have to fix and it's a me problem. But the core kind of message of the book is it's probably not all you. Some of it could be. Hey, we're not perfect, but a lot of it is stuff that's going on inside and sometimes outside, these hidden barriers that are often hard to see that not many people are talking about, that could be preventing you from getting out of your own way, from seeing the progress and the results that you want.
Right.
And where we need to start on this kind of journey of self-discovery with our finances is ask ourselves, okay, so how does money make you feel? And that's probably a question that, again, no one's ever asked me that. I've never thought of that before. And so I start with that because we need to get in touch with our feelings as much as, and I say this as someone who really has a hard time getting in touch with my feelings. And so it was important to me to also be vulnerable and better understand my own relationship with money. But, I kind of listed some of the emotions that you just shared, such as shame and guilt and things like that. I got all of those just from listening to my audience over the past decade of what are some of the most common words that keep on popping up. And then I even did a little survey when I was writing the book. Hey, tell me what words come up for you when I ask you this question. And these were the prominent feelings. Now it could be more expansive than this. Absolutely. There's a whole feelings wheel I suggest people check out, but these are the most, and shame is number one. Yeah. And I have issues with money and shame, and most people do because of so many things, but especially our upbringing, how money was represented in our lives. Yeah. And shame is such a destructive feeling. It's helpful in some ways because it can help us change behaviors that aren't good. But if we feel ashamed about ourselves, our identity, and how we are with money, then that's a really hard thing to change within ourselves if you don't acknowledge that it's, you are more than your money. It doesn't matter how much you earn. It doesn't mean you're lesser than someone who has more. But we have a lot of these beliefs about ourselves that make us ashamed, that then prevents us from asking questions, from learning the things that we don't know, from asking for help.
The ostrich head in the sand situation that really comes from shame. I think shame leads to avoidance and hiding, really hiding your money from yourself and hiding your situation from others. So it is I think shame can be one of the most isolating emotions and experiences.
Absolutely.
And that can really be a block in getting the help, getting the advice, normalizing talking about money. Yeah. It's funny how taboo it is. I will get on here and just talk about anything about sex and pretty much not feel shame.
Yeah.
But I would feel really uncomfortable doing like a personal look into my finances.
Isn't it interesting that like, especially over the past several decades, sex that used to be a thing that was very shameful. Don't ever talk about that. And it's, even when I was like growing up, I'd say like in, middle school, it was still very problematic, you know, women and sex and how dare you think about it, talk about it, all that kind of stuff. And we've made so many strides, but we're still not at the same point with money. Like money is still so taboo and uncomfortable to talk about. As much as there are more voices online talking about it, still, I feel like we're still at the very beginning of this kind of like,
it's like, it's
evolution.
more publicly talked about, but I still think amongst our like intimate relationships, like when people start dating or amongst our friend groups and even still in our families, it's like a scary thing to bring up. And it's I have a dear friend who in her relationship has been really learning how to share her finances, and like they sat together and went through her bank statements, and she really expressed how frightening it was, like how deeply ashamed she felt. And even though it was like a beautiful experience of like, hey, let's do this together and like, let's support each other and let's like have our eyes wide open about this. And so it was like the most loving experience, but like crazy how scary that is to do with someone you love versus all the other things we are totally
I know,
fine.
it's like you're super intimate with your partner in so many ways. But I agree. I still remember so vividly when me and my husband, we were dating for I think at least 4 years, and we'd had some conversations about money, but pretty surface level, nothing crazy. And it wasn't until after 4 years when we moved in together, we went, got financially naked, so to speak, and shared our bank accounts, our credit, how much do we have. I had no idea if he had debt or not because we never even really talked about it. And that was a really pivotal point in our relationship, because knowing where we stand, then we can start talking about, well, what are our goals? What do we want to achieve individually, but then also as like a team? And then you can kind of build on that. And then it just like solidifies that relationship. But it's so hard. Most people are like, I'll wait for a better time or But it's super important. But I think what people are concerned about is, I don't want my partner to judge me. What if they're like, oh my God, you have this debt? Well, I don't want to be, and there are some judgmental people out there. There may be some people out there that are like, I don't want to be someone. Red flag. I don't want to be someone with debt, even though, well, that's something that can change. That's not permanent. They can get out of debt. Maybe they just don't have the tools, or they've never had the support that they needed to figure out how to get out of debt. And so, but I feel like for the longest time we were taught that how you are with money, or how much you have, how much you don't, how much you owe, is a representation of you as a person. But it's like, none of us were taught about money.
Makes people, I think the fear of judgment is people are fearful that it will like create their identity. Like this is a person who is bad at money, or this is a person who's irresponsible or irrational. And all of these characterizations based on your history with money can be put on you if you're surrounding yourself with judgmental people, or sometimes we're projecting that fear on ourselves and no one else is thinking that. But I think that's where a lot of that fear comes from. I
mean, I think, and also too, we're seeing this a lot with, for whatever reason, and it's got to be some sort of human behavior development that we have from a long time ago. But when we see someone with wealth, even if they're not a good person, we think, but they must have done something right.
Oh, interesting.
Whereas we see someone who maybe is in debt or is floundering or is low income, and we're like, well, what did they do wrong? And then they must be a bad person compared to this good person who has money. But it's like, that does not mean you're a good or a bad person, how much you have, or whatever situation you're in. Because again, that is changeable. Right? That has, and it has really nothing to do with your identity, but for whatever reason, our society, capitalism, we think that your net worth is your self-worth. Your value as a person is how much you have, which is absolutely ridiculous. Right?
That's such an interesting point too, because now on the flip side, because we assigned like good or bad based on like how much money you had or how much debt you had. And now societally, so that may still be the case in like intimate relationships, but the societal shift towards like people who are wealthy are obviously bad people. That's starting to be on the rise. And like, billionaire culture and like bad behavior from people at the top, like it makes sense, but that's like trickling down into, like the whole Nepo baby conversation. And so what I'm noticing is that shame really exists, as you say in your book, on the end of like, I'm embarrassed and shameful of my past and not having enough, or my current state with money. And also there's shame. I think a lot of people carry around like, I come from privilege and I feel ashamed or embarrassed for anyone to know because I don't want that to make me a bad person or automatic assumptions to be made. So is there a different approach in navigating your way through that shame based on if it's coming from lack versus from like privilege?
I think the first thing is you just need to acknowledge that you have shame, because that's kind of the first step in figuring out, how can I let this go and how can I not have it define me? I agree. A lot of people, I think prominently the people that I talk to, come from a place of shame because they grew up with less. And that can be, and that's a spectrum. So even when I was writing this book, I was very careful to describe my upbringing, because I grew up with less than most people, but I wouldn't consider myself like, experiencing poverty. Even though when I talk to my parents, they have a different experience, and who knows what the truth is, but I always felt like my needs were met. And never saw anything that was going on in the background because I was a child. But that was my experience, and that really affected me, because then I would compare myself to people who had more, and I would think, oh my gosh, is there something wrong with my family? What are we? Because I didn't have a concept of what money was or incomes or and things like that. And so if you don't work through that, or really be like, that was my past, and also I was a child, I had nothing to do with it, and also my parents were doing the best that they can, and I'm so grateful. We need to be able to really just like process that, so we can kind of let that go and not carry it with us for the rest of our lives, always having it in the back of our head, I'm a poor kid or something like that. And the same goes for like, if you grew up with more, especially if you grew up in a community where you did have more than most of the other community members, you probably felt a little isolated in that respect as well, because you maybe felt embarrassed because you had more. And maybe, I give the example in the book of Richie Rich from like, that 90s movie with Macaulay Culkin. And even though that was a bit of a different situation, he, was kind of a bit ostracized and wanted to hang out and have friends. And, kind of the poor quote unquote kids didn't want to be friends with him because he had money. Now that's, again, a very privileged position. It's like, I'd rather be in that situation than be the poor kid.
Of course.
But no matter what, there's still some shame. There's still some bad feelings. And at the end of the day, we all just want to be part of the group. We want to be included. We want to belong. That's it. And so we need to, if you came from that kind of situation where you had more and were embarrassed about it, and so maybe you hid certain things, you didn't want kids coming over to your house because you didn't want them to see what your house looked like because maybe it was bigger than others. We need to also process that. And we need to figure out, okay, how can I let this go and realize that's not me anymore, or this didn't make me good or bad. It was just the situation it was, and it shouldn't define me going forward.
I love that. And I don't think I realized how much that was actually impacting me, because I am really fortunate to have grown up in an abundant environment, and I come from privilege and went to private school, and I was in a bubble where there was so much wealth in the private school community and like so much more. Also, I was like, whoa.
Did you feel like, because there's an example in the book too, where it's like, were you like the poor person in this bubble of wealth?
I probably,
even though you're like, we were comfortable.
There was definitely people that were like on a crazy next level.
Yeah.
Like I probably just felt, I didn't really think about it back then. It all just felt very normal. And then when I actually got out into the real world after, I'd say in the past 5 years, traveling more, exposing myself to way different people, way outside of that community that I grew up in, I started to feel a lot of shame.
Right.
That
like, oh my gosh, I had no
don't
idea.
deserve this. I had it so much easier than so many of these people, and why should I?
Hardworking, and why should I? And they didn't.
And I felt guilty. I felt ashamed, and I felt a good friend of mine always says, "Don't waste your privilege." So that's a beautiful spin on it, because I started to be like, okay, how can I really use that privilege to like be of benefit and be of service, rather than making this a source of shame. But where I started to see it like leak into my everyday life was if I was doing work for individuals, companies, I didn't really care, but for individuals, I wouldn't want to charge them that much, because I'd feel like they're a person and they maybe didn't have the fortunate background that I had. So I shouldn't be asking for more from them because I'm so lucky. And I have, so no matter how hard I'm working or what my output is, even right now, I'm feeling like stressed talking about this, but no matter how hard I worked, it was like, I felt guilty asking for more, because I felt like other people should get more than me. I had it easier. And then when I started realizing I was carrying this like shame and guilt that was like getting in my way of my belief that I still deserve to earn money based on what I do and how hard I work. And so I've been kind of unraveling that and trying to understand how I can have a more positive relationship with it. But it really took being in different environments for me to realize I am ashamed of this.
Yeah. And even you just mentioning, that's so interesting, because I actually do know a lot of people who, depending on like what kind of maybe industry they work in, they feel like, well, because I'm in a better position than maybe the people I'm helping, I shouldn't charge any money or give them a heavy discount, even if it's to my detriment, even if it means that I actually get hurt kind of it. And I haven't had that. It's complicated being a financial educator. I've been doing this for over 13 years now. And for a good like 4 or 5 years, I didn't monetize anything. And part of it was like, it just wasn't as easy to monetize. But part of it was also, I didn't want to ask for money because I thought that would look bad. And how dare I, someone who is working really hard, giving all this free financial information and education, ask for money from people who are literally, I'm in debt. I don't have any money. How dare you ask me for money?
Oh, that's a hard
position.
position.
So that was really difficult for me to then figure out a way. I'm like, well, now I'm getting hurt because now this is my full-time job. I actually have to charge people for my services or products or things that I worked really hard on. But that was something difficult for me to even overcome, because I felt shame even ask, how dare I, when there's so many people in need. But I'm like, I do still help people for free. I do sometimes be like, don't worry about it. And then, you know, when I'm working maybe with a bigger organization who has a bigger budget, then I'm like, okay, I feel more comfortable there. And it's just, finding out what are some ways that makes me feel good, but then I'm not, you know, sacrificing things that are, you know, important, and I need to get paid as well.
Yeah, exactly. We all deserve to make a living and to have abundance. And also, if you have privilege to use it well. I think that's like where I'm trying to find the balance.
Absolutely. And there's a whole chapter on privilege specifically. And not a ton. I'm seeing this more, but definitely over, you know, when I started reading personal finance books, which started probably back in 2010 or 11, no money book talked about privilege, which is kind of wild with this new lens we have in 2025, especially, is so many books. I just read this one too. Like, I think it was when I was writing my book, and it was an older book from like the 90s. And the messaging was so aggressive and very much, well, if you want to be rich, stop acting poor. Like, that was like the overall message. I'm like, this was like a popular book.
Insane.
Sold so many copies. I'm like, this is insane, because that's just not an option for most people. They're like, I'm literally trying to pay my rent. And the crazy grocery store prices you know, cost of living is so expensive right now, especially if you live in a big city like Toronto or wherever. And, you know, the people that, you know, say things like that, or like, oh, you're in that financial position. They're so out of touch because they don't understand their own privilege. It's like, you can say that because you have money.
Exactly.
When you don't have as many options, and it is more difficult. And so I really want to highlight how important it is to understand what privilege means, because there's so many different layers. Like, I was even thinking, you know, I didn't really identify it in the book, but like, oh, I should have added it. It was like my brother-in-law. It's like, oh, you forgot about pretty privilege. I'm like, that is a big privilege. And so we need to understand these privileges exist. Which categories do we fall into if we do? And then we need to acknowledge that there are people who don't have any of these privileges, or not all of them. And so it is going to be harder for them to achieve maybe the same things that you achieve.
And you don't have to stay small and limit yourself just because you have that privilege. It's about like, how do I spend it? Like, how do I spend it? That's such a great way to frame it. I've never really thought about it like that, but I'm like, absolutely. It's like, if you have privilege, you have a responsibility to do good in the world. And so, like we kind of touched on, there's, you know, especially in the media with like the SpaceX thing and all that kind of stuff, these women have crazy privilege and are clearly a little out of touch. Not all of them. I know there was a couple, but like more the celebrities who were on board. And it's just like, yikes. We need to make sure that we need to check ourselves and be grounded, because you don't want to, like, what was it, Gail King who's like, have you been to space? I'm like, no one can afford to go to space. No, we haven't. Some people have never left their city. Like, get out of here. Do you know when people don't have passports? Like, stop.
We're trying to have our shelter and our food and just survive.
We're out here just trying to survive on Earth, let alone leave it.
So that's a bit like, okay, hopefully some of the criticism she's been able to kind of take in and maybe reflect. That's what I'm hoping.
I hope so too. I have to give credit. Shout out to my great friend Sophia for the Don't Waste Your Privilege, because it really has like helped shift things.
So that's a really great thing. You know, have empathy. And that's the other big message of the book. We need more empathy when it comes to our money, but also the money of others, because we are so quick to judge why someone's in a situation. But poor people or people who are low income or have less, it's not because they made a bunch of bad decisions. Sometimes you're born into that, or sometimes life happens, your partner dies, you get evicted, you lose your job. There's so many things that could happen to you at any moment that can change the rest of your life. Like I think I referred to in the book I haven't read the book, but I watched the Netflix series Made. Have you seen that?
No, but I've been wanting to.
It's incredible, a great representation of how someone can be low income because of circumstance.
Yes, 100%.
And that's how the most people that I talk to who are in a situation, I don't have money, can you help me? And then I, take a look at what's going on, is circumstance. Yeah. It's not because they're just having fun at the mall. It's not like they're having
a chill time.
No, they're not just spending money because they don't care. They care so much.
Yes.
But all these things are making it really difficult just to get a little bit ahead.
Yeah. I also want to deep dive more into the guilt aspect, since that is a different, it can be conflated, but it is different than shame. And I love how you broke it down into rational and irrational guilt.
Yeah.
Could you walk us through the difference and how those kinds of guilt can either like help steer us positively or be deterrent to our growth financially?
So even just to differentiate shame and guilt, because a lot of people use those terms interchangeably. Shame means that something's fundamentally wrong with you and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm a bad person. Guilt is that you did something wrong.
Yes.
That's my bad. I did something that I wish I didn't. I regret that. So shame, that's why shame is so much harder to really kind of overcome. Because
it becomes your identity versus it's like an action.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Guilt is really about behavior and actions that you can change. And again, guilt is important. All these emotions are actually important. That's why we have them. They're telling us something so we can be better, so we can grow. And so for guilt, there's irrational and rational guilt. Rational guilt is you do something like, you're talking with some friends and, a friend told you a little bit of gossip and she's like, please don't tell anybody. Yeah. And then you tell somebody and you're like, shoot, I really shouldn't have done that. I feel guilty about that. You should. Because you shouldn't do that. You did something wrong. And so hopefully that feeling of guilt will prevent you from doing it again. Whereas irrational guilt is feeling guilty about something that really has nothing to do with you, or you're taking extended ownership over something that you really don't need to. So in terms of like finance, I see that a lot where people, they feel guilty dipping into the emergency fund. They spent so much time saving up for when an emergency happens and they need cash so they don't have to get into debt. They feel guilty getting money out of that account, even though, that's what the account's for. But they feel guilty about it. They're like, well, and that could be, again, maybe even tied to shame, be like, how did I get myself into a spot where there's an emergency?
Right.
But I see that so much, especially with people who are, just trying to save up that emergency fund because they know it's so important. And then they have to dip into it and they feel like a failure for doing that. It's like, no, that's what it's for.
Why we have it.
And actually you should be proud of yourself that you set yourself up and you're protecting yourself. And this is all good things. Yeah. But I see that so often. Or even with like, I guess this is more rational guilt. I'm seeing a lot of chatter online about, investing. The stock market's very volatile right now. And, people feeling guilty for like, oh gosh, I can't believe I made this choice and I really regret it. Okay, we can learn from that. Yeah. But there's definitely some irrationality going on a lot with investing where, people, are doing the right thing, but they feel bad about it. And you're like, no, we need to actually ignore that feeling, that instinct, whatever that is, that's not helping.
Yeah, some people feel guilty for even engaging in this.
Or like, again, it could be going back to their privilege. I feel guilty that I have them funds that I can actually invest and make some money, whereas so many people are losing their jobs and all these things. Yeah. It's like, I get it, but actually that's not your problem. Wrong. You're not hurting anybody. And that is kind of irrational guilt for you to feel bad for maybe doing certain things to get you in a financial position so you can't afford to continue investing or start investing.
Right. So understanding the difference is like a great temperature check for, is there something to learn or is this not serving me? And if it's irrational guilt, then maybe there's like some mindset work you can do around like, why am I putting this on myself? And is it limiting me? And if it is a rational guilt, it's there because there's something to learn from.
Exactly. Yeah, really is a great temperature check to figure out, why do I feel guilty for things I really shouldn't? And maybe that goes, and then you can go down that path and be like, where's that go? It can go pretty deep probably.
100%. Yeah. I also really loved the part in the book where you were talking about how people with a damaged relationship with money typically fall into 3 different camps, and understanding which camp you're in can kind of help you like dissect your money behaviors a bit more and maybe correct them or understand, you know, how to move forward. And those 3 camps were avoidance, worshiping money, and then using it to fulfill a need in a relationship. I'd love to understand more about how those show up, like how we figure out what category we might be in.
I think a lot of us have toxic money behaviors we don't realize. I definitely, while writing the book, realized that I had some very toxic money behaviors, and I thought I had everything figured out, and no, I did not. And so, the first camp is like the avoidance. So, and I see this with a lot of people where, I mean, you know, we just talked about it, how uncomfortable it is to talk about money. They'd rather avoid it. So it's very prominent that people are trying to avoid anything to do with money because it makes them feel bad. And again, where that comes from, that's a whole other kind of conversation, but really identifying what, you know, how do you feel when this happens? How do you feel when you get a bill? You know, it comes to your email and it says, okay, this is due in, you know, 5 days. And you're like, do you delete the email or avoid it? That might be a toxic money behavior, because you're
people
just
who don't
like,
check their mail. They don't want to see
people who
the
don't check
bills.
their mail. People who just don't check their bank accounts. People who just avoid everything money because it just makes them feel a certain way that they just can't process it. They just can't handle it. And that can lead to some really bad things, obviously. I mean, that's why a lot of people, I think, end up in debt is, you know, they're kind of aware, but they just don't want to know because they think it's going to be worse than it probably actually is.
That makes sense.
And it's funny, when I do work with clients one-on-one, that's the main part, is really seeing where is your money. And that makes people so like, oh, really? We're going to do that on, you know, day one? Like, yeah, we have to find out. And guarantee you it's not as bad as you think, because usually our minds go to the worst case scenario.
We catastrophize. Humans will always catastrophize. Worst case scenario.
And so there's avoidance. There's a couple different ways that can manifest. The other one, which is worshiping money. So again, most people may not think, like, what does that even mean? Well, it can take a lot of different forms. One really common form is workaholism. Or, you know, obviously I see this a lot on social media. There's so much money worship of my life is amazing because this is how much I earn. And I see a lot of conversation being like, I just want to be transparent. I'm like, yeah, but what you may not realize as an after effect is people are like, well, I need more money. And it's just, the whole goal is money, money, money.
And like extreme consumerism. Like, do we need a fucking 40-step, $10,000 nighttime routine? Like, guys, this has gotten out of control.
It's like, it's not even like who has time for that. Because I don't know. I have like 3 steps, and that's hard. Maybe 4 steps if I wash my face.
0.
You know? And I don't know who has that. But the money involved with these things is absolutely incredible. And you're kind of worshiping money in a way because you just, it's always on your mind. I need more. And you never have an
very
enough
tied to
point.
your worth. Like,
and it's tied to your worth too. Exactly. So if you maybe don't hit certain targets of like income, or you spend more than you should, you're going to feel bad. And so then you're going to consistently be in the cycle. I need to work more. And I used to be in that cycle for a very long time. Hustle culture still exists, unfortunately, but it was really rampant, I feel like, around 2017, 2018. That's my experience anyway.
Probably when we started our podcast.
When we started. And it just, I always felt like I wasn't, and sometimes I get into them. Like, honestly, I was like, throughout this week, I was just like, oh, I need to do more. And like, let's chill, because you need to acknowledge all the stuff that you have been doing. You know, we're so quick to immediately forget all the hard work we just did and compare ourselves to someone else in maybe a different lane who has nothing to do with anything, and say, we're not doing enough, and I don't have enough, I am not enough. And so, and just, workaholism especially, I think a lot of, because it is kind of, you know, seen as a good thing. Oh, wow, such a hard worker, pulling those late nights. Like,
it's
I used
really
to work,
celebrated.
Yes, it's celebrated and praised if you do that. And I used to work years ago, like 8 years ago, at a law firm. And I wasn't even a lawyer. I was working in marketing. And just the environment of workaholism was wild. Just people come in early, stay
you get your
late.
badge of honor.
You get a badge of honor if you're the last one in the office, and you're like, why? No, but like, now that I have this perspective, I'm like, our jobs weren't even that important. You know, we weren't saving lives. You know what I mean? We were doing like social media
doing this for?
and email marketing. Like, we need to relax. But you just get sucked into this environment where you just feel like it's more. And you need to take a step back to be like, this is not healthy. This is not helping me. I'm getting burnout, which is a real thing. And we need to figure that out. And so the third thing, which is using money as a way to kind of get something that you need in the relationship. I think a lot of people probably do this and don't realize they're doing this. But if you crave attention or you just need something, and so we're going to use money to either fill that void or be a conduit to try to get that. So some people use money as a way to maybe manipulate their partner to get what they want. So whether that is like attention or just whatever the case is. Or we could be like, I'm really, sad right now or depressed, or I'm going through something. Oh, I know what could help. Me spending some money or me, using money in some kind of mechanism to do that. Yeah. And so
also probably control in relationship and like codependency. A lot of relationships I think can become really codependent with money being like a core part of that.
Yeah. And which is why I'm always a big, advocate for no matter what kind of relationship you're in and how great your partner is, you need to have financial independence.
Yes.
Because I've seen it in real life. You think that person is going to be amazing. Cut to a year later, they're kind of a different person and they're pulling the purse strings and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't move out because I don't have, everything is a joint account. Yeah. They will know every financial move.
Yeah.
And that's a real thing. Like I talk about financial abuse in the book, and it can be as subtle as just like, oh, well, we just got a joint credit card and a joint bank account. Oh, now I don't have any of my own bank accounts. And he just wants to know every single thing. And now he doesn't want me to work anymore because he wants me to stay at home and take care of the kids. And all these things sound like not that bad, but they could easily be turned and used in a negative way if you're not careful.
Losing your independence. Yeah,
exactly.
On the discussion of relationships, I thought it was so interesting how you brought attachment theory into the discussion of money.
That's my favorite part. That was so much fun.
I loved that. And I love attachment theory. And I've had some great experts on the podcast about this purely through the lens of relationships. And I'd love to hear more about how it impacts the way we show up financially for ourselves and in relationship with others.
Absolutely. I am obsessed with attachment theory. I learned about it in a kind of a weird way. I think it was maybe a few months before I got my book deal. And I read this book. I wanted to read it for a while. It was called Platonic. And it was about attachment theory, but specifically with platonic relationships. And normally it gets talked about more in romantic relationships. I thought it was so fascinating. And it made me realize, I'm like, oh, I actually didn't realize I fit into one of these categories. And so when I was doing research for the book, it just made sense that, well, we have a relationship with people and we react in certain ways based off our own attachment style. Right. And sometimes money gets thrown into the mix because, again, like you can use it as a manipulation tool if you're an insecure attachment style, if you're like an anxious attachment style, and you feel like you're not getting attention and your fear of abandonment is overwhelming. So you're going to use money as a way, like maybe you could put something really big on your credit card. So your partner's like, what the hell was that? Now they're giving you the attention that you want, right? That's what's called a protest behavior.
Oh, wow.
So that's one way money's involved, but also you can do these like protest behaviors with money specifically. So, if you're an anxious attachment style, for example, and again, your fear is abandonment. And so sometimes you're too needy and just too attentive. You may, check your bank accounts too often. You may contact your advisor, your financial advisor way too often. You may just be too
constantly needing like reassurance.
Attention. Wow, exactly. Yeah. And then, so there's a couple of different attachment styles. There's 4. So secure is you're a secure person. You're probably secure with your money, secure in your life. 50% of the population is secure. Thank goodness.
That's higher than I expected.
There's 50% that are insecure.
Wow.
I know that's pretty high actually. But we know there's always those people you're like, oh yeah, that person's definitely secure. Like they're fine.
Yeah.
And then there's the insecure attachment styles, which are anxious, avoidant, disorganized.
Right.
Anxious is like, if you've ever met a friend, you're like, wow, they're really needy. They're probably an anxious attachment style.
Yeah.
Avoidant, if you've ever met someone, you're like, wow, they're always so non-committal or aloof, or they never get back to me. They're probably avoidant. Yeah. Their biggest fear is intimacy and vulnerability. So they don't like closeness. They want to get away from it.
And they're probably avoiding dealing with financial issues.
Yeah. So those are the ones that don't want to take a look at their money or don't want to talk about it, or they're just not in, if they're in a relationship, especially I think I give an example in the book where there was these 2 men who were in a relationship, really intimate, great. They got married, but one was avoidant. And so whenever his partner brought up, hey, we should get a bank account together. Hey, let's talk about our future financial plans. He would always shut it down, be like, no, and then turn it into an argument. So the conversation would end there.
Wow.
And a lot of people do that, may not even realize that they're doing it because they're just so uncomfortable with money. And then there's disorganized, which is the kind of the worst one, and apparently I'm in that grouping, which is like, oh, that makes sense actually when I look at my life, is a combination depending on your environment or which kind of people you're with. If you're with avoidance, you're going to be more anxious. If you're with more anxious people, you're going to be more avoidant.
Right.
And so it's kind of it's very disorganized.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so again, this can manifest in your money in so many different ways, depending on how you're feeling or what happened in your day.
Yeah.
You may want to avoid money, or you may become super, needy and just like want to check.
Right. Oh, that's so interesting. And obviously this applies in romantic relationships and everything, but it's just so interesting how that can apply to the way you approach your personal relationship.
I feel
you're
like
in relationship with yourself. And so,
I feel like everyone needs to know what their attachment style is, because once you understand it, and then you can also just see yourself in like maybe previous relationships or your current one, you're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Makes a lot of sense.
Because especially like I'd say I've only been in 2 romantic relationships, one with my husband who I've been with for 18 years. So I'm not really good with that. But for friendships, it really makes a lot of sense, because whenever I was in a friendship with someone who was anxious, I'd be more avoidant. Whenever I was friends with someone who was more avoidant, I'd become more anxious.
Yeah, that makes
and I'm like,
sense.
my God, it's just like so clear as day when you understand this is what's going on. Wow. And then once you know, when you have that information, then you can make better choices.
Yeah. And you can just notice it and not judge it, but like notice it
like,
and be like, okay, I see what's
what
happening
I'm doing.
here. And,
I just slipped back into that pattern. I don't like that. We're going to not do that again.
Yeah, exactly. Because it is all just patterns, which I think is helpful. Like you're not stuck in this. If you are anxiously attached, avoidant, whatever it isn't like a life sentence.
No.
It is noticing.
Yeah, you're not like,
patterns.
well, this is who I am. Can't change me. No.
Yeah.
This is just like, why? This is an explanation.
Yes.
But you can absolutely just be more, aware, and then make different choices and start to change those behaviors.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I also loved that you brought ADHD into the conversation. So interesting, because the more I have not formally gotten a diagnosis, but I have self-diagnosed based on doing many, many online tests and having everyone in my life confirm that I have ADHD. But it shows up so differently in different people.
It does.
And has been like wildly underdiagnosed in women also. But that's a conversation for another day. But there's all these behaviors associated with it, like maybe impulsivity and like not being as good with money. For me, I think it is more like avoidance and procrastination of like admin and executive functioning issues. But I'd love to hear more about how you're seeing ADHD affect people's like financial security and behaviors, and you know how they deal with money.
Well, it's just kind of like you said, basically whatever your behaviors are in kind of any situation, whether it is like that hyperactivity or that impulsivity, that could happen in any aspect of your life, such as like, just like cleaning your house. You're like, you're either like compulsive with it. Maybe you're like, I'm just always cleaning my house, or you're avoiding it. Like you're just like, I actually can't, which room should I start with? And then there's just too many things. This can absolutely just be involved with your money, such as like, I said I was going to start budgeting. I said I was going to start investing, but there's so many options and so many stages, and I'm not sure where to start. So a year has gone by and then nothing's happened. And just because you're just like, I just can't figure it out because I just don't have the tools, and whatever the case is. And so I've actually been seeing over the years in the kind of like influencer space, a lot more content creators who discovered, and a lot of people discovered they had ADHD over COVID. And I think also maybe that had also something to do with it. But there's a lot more people talking about it in relation to their money. And so there's a few great people that specifically talk about that. And I always kind of point people like, if you feel like you're like, all the tools out there that people are talking about, all the advice, sounds great. It just isn't working for me, and I don't know why. And I have ADHD. Do you think that has something to do with it? Probably. And there are some people who have that same life experience that can then be like, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about, and here are some tools that have helped me.
Right.
But the other interesting kind of aspect of me bringing up ADHD is like, number one, that's like something we need to, if you've got that, this is going to kind of change probably some of how you manage your money compared to someone who doesn't have it. But in that chapter, I also talk about trauma and how there's such an interesting connection that I discovered working with a therapist. She's like, did you know there's a big overlap between symptoms of ADHD and trauma?
Oh, interesting.
And so some people have ADHD. Some people have ADHD type symptoms, but actually they just have undiagnosed, like they just have unhealed trauma that they haven't figured out and worked through it. Because there's just like, there's a Venn diagram I have in the book, and you're like, oh, that's so weird. So Sometimes you may think it's ADHD and it's trauma. Sometimes you may have trauma, but it's actually maybe ADHD.
Yeah.
There's a lot of overlap
also,
and anxiety.
The overlap between
There's
ADHD
so much
and
overlap.
anxiety.
And so that's why it's so important to kind of learn a little bit more about that. And also too, if you have trauma, I think you're more prone to have ADHD, or it could be if you have ADHD, you're more prone to be in a situation where there's something that could cause you trauma.
Right.
There's a lot of things to just be aware of, but there's an interesting connection between ADHD and trauma that you may want to look more into because again, in that chapter, I talk a lot about how trauma affects your money and it has a big impact, life-changing impact on your money. And most people have never made that connection before.
Wow. Yeah, that's huge. So if someone does have ADHD and they're realizing that this is impacting their financial security and how they're dealing with money, what would the next step be? Is there research about how they should approach this? Do they get an expert or a mentor or an advisor who specializes in ADHD? Like, how do they figure this out?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say that there probably are that many like financial professionals that specialize with clients with ADHD. They probably do exist. There's definitely some content creators that I'm like, these are people that might just speak your language.
Yeah. And there's therapists I know now.
Yeah, and there's
ADHD.
And so I'd say probably where you'd want to start is someone who can help you with your ADHD first, and then money, and then find someone else for the money part. Because once you can find tools on how to manage whatever your ADHD symptoms are, or the things that you typically do, you're like, oh, I wish I didn't do that, or I wish I was, could take action instead of delay, or all these things. You can learn the tools in that way with a mental health professional who is a specialist in that. And then I think it'll be a little bit more clear on, oh, okay, I'm doing that with my money too. So now I have these tools for this aspect of my life. Maybe I can just copy and paste that with some of my financial kind of stuff.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious to know, what do you think the number one thing is that people are doing wrong today with their money management?
Honestly, the biggest thing is not taking it seriously, and I understand why, especially with Gen Z. There's this big overwhelming feeling of despair and hopelessness,
right?
Because of the cost of housing, cost of living, salaries and incomes not keeping pace at all.
Yeah.
It just feels like, what's the point? There's no way I'm going to be able to achieve any semblance of what my parents or grandparents ever achieved. So why even bother? And so because of this feeling of hopelessness, there is kind of a resistance to learning and doing some of these really practical but boring things with your money, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because when I look back, I'm like, I also felt like that in my 20s. It was like,
true.
Housing started getting super expensive. I'm from Vancouver. It was incredible. I graduated during the Great Recession. I had a really hard time finding a job. When I did, I still needed a second job just to pay all of my bills. However, I feel like the difference for me was the vibe with millennials was, well, we've got to do something. And also the fear of like, oh, no one's going to take care of me. Like when I learned that, I'm not going to get a pension. I thought everyone just got a pension. That's just a thing I heard about. And my parents are like, no, it depends on the company you work for.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
So wait, who's going to pay for my retirement? They're like, you have to. I'm like, what? And so honestly, it was the fear of God that like drew me to personal finance, realizing like, oh, I have to take care of me. No one else is going to do that. Well, I better get started.
Yeah.
And now that was just like, I think part of it is just my personality.
Yeah.
Not everyone would react in the same way.
Yeah.
But it really was like fear of like, no one's going to take care of me but me. I better get started.
Yeah.
But I do feel like when you maybe are further along the spectrum where it's like, oh, I'm beyond fear. Yeah. I'm just like despair and, when
we don't have hope, we don't take action.
No, because you're like, there's literally no, like the amount of times I've heard, especially since COVID, but like now as well, that people just think all is lost. I'm like, but it's not.
Oh,
we thought it all was lost back in 2020 and it wasn't. Yeah. Now we're 5 years later and it's wild. We're seeing the same conversations of what's the point of investing? What's the point of saving money? What's the point of paying off my student loans when the world is on fire and it's not going to last that much longer? I'm like, the thing is, in all likelihood, you are going to live till 80 or 90.
Yeah.
And so you need to figure something out, and all hope isn't lost, even though I know it does not feel like that. And believe me, it's much scarier to still be in this mindset of like, well, what's the point in your 30s, 40s, 50s?
Yeah.
You want to like, you can feel like that, but kind of like put it to the side in a little box and then do it anyway and do
even
those
if
things
you
anyway.
feel hopeless, like take advantage of the compound interest of
Yeah.
both our like actions in our self-improvement and of having money in the market of when you start young. So it's I think it's like that idea of like not following your emotion.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
following like an action.
Yeah. Like when it comes to money, it's in life, it's important. This is kind of the other big point of the book. It's important to feel your feelings.
Yeah.
But feelings kind of, when it comes to like smart money management, have no place with money because they will push you in all the wrong directions.
Right.
So, you know, if you're being guided by your emotions when it comes to your money, you're not going to probably end up in a good space. You have to kind of take the emotions out of that. And if you feel like that's just impossible for me, that's probably where I would then suggest it's time for a mental health professional. I think it's time to talk to a therapist to be like, this probably isn't actually about money, is it?
Right.
It's not. Money is like a byproduct.
Yeah.
It's not about money. It's
It's about everything but money.
It's about everything but money.
It's about everything but money. Such a good title.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So we have to be aware of our emotions and how they're impacting our behaviors, but then not follow them and not use them as our guide.
Because most of I think a lot of us maybe confuse, well, this is how I feel, so that's my instinct, and I got to listen to my gut. And it's like, well, is it your gut though?
Or is it fear?
And is it fear? Is it something that you are mistaking for an instinct? And even too, there's a whole chapter on behavioral finance and behavior. Our instincts that keep us alive, that have helped us survive, have no place with money because they actually, again, will lead us astray. And so a lot of
because
people,
our instincts would be like risk adverse.
Yeah. Our instinct is like, well, I don't want to lose it all. So I'm going to not participate in the stock market. I'm not going to take a risk with my career. I'm going to play it safe because that will keep me alive. And that makes sense in certain circumstances, such as like, maybe don't jump out of a plane like that, you know, like, fair enough. You don't do that. You have a higher likelihood of surviving. But when it comes to your money, guess what? Like when these behaviors were developed in humans thousands and thousands of years ago, money didn't exist. Right. Like it wasn't a thing. Yeah. And so that's what's so confusing with people is they feel like, well, my body and my mind are telling me to do this, so I'm going to do that. And you're like, oh, actually, you need to do the opposite, unfortunately.
Yeah. Our survival instincts are not benefiting us necessarily.
They have nothing to do with money. They're great to keep you alive, but not help you reach your retirement goals.
I also loved the reflection questions that were sprinkled throughout the book. I found them really helpful. And for anyone who's just kind of looking for like the most potent 3 journaling questions or prompts or like check-in points, what would you say are like 3 prompts that people could take home right now and reflect on to better understand their relationship with money and to explore it?
Yeah, I'd say the first place to start is right at the beginning. So really identifying what your origin story with your money is. So there's an exercise at the start of the book about really uncovering your first money memory. And I give an example of mine. So start there just to be like, if you're like, I have no idea, like, I don't know. What was the first interaction you had with money and how did it make you feel? And what happened? What are the details? That will reveal a lot. I guarantee whatever happened to you when you're like 4 years old will have a lot to do with how money is in your life right now as an adult.
Right.
And that's always kind of an exciting aha moment. Like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that thing that happened to me, I'm still carrying it with me. And here we are. Yeah. I'd also say, take a look at the way money was kind of a member of your family. Did your parents talk about it positively or negatively? And how do you think about it still now? And are there things you're carrying with you that are not serving you, but they've just always been there? I mean, I do this all the time. I've got a lot of things you're like, I need to let go of that because that's something that my parents always said and it's actually not helping me anymore. Maybe it helped them. It's not helping me in my life, in my situation. So reflecting on how was money a member of my family growing up, and are some things that I need to let go of, and there's some maybe things that I can hang on to because they are actually helpful. And then really, and kind of how I end the book is remembering that, you know, although it's so important to better understand your relationship with money so you can kind of break it down to rebuild it, at the end of the day, money isn't that important. Like, again, when you reach, fulfill all of your basic needs, don't misconstrue that money is the thing that will bring you satisfaction or happiness or joy or all these things that maybe you've been searching. Money is not going to fulfill that.
Yeah. You need to meet your needs.
You need to meet your needs, but beyond that, for your kind of bigger needs, money is just a tool that it's up to you how to use. But more money, you know, I see so many people online like, if I just had this amount of money, I know I'd be happier. And you're like, well, there's studies that say no.
Yeah.
You know, money, like I give a example in the book that there's been data that shows that although, yes, more money can lead to more happiness to a certain point, but money can't actually solve your unhappiness if you're or your misery. So if you're miserable and unhappy and depressed, I mean, again, money can help pay for therapy, but money itself in your bank account, the more you see it, it's just gonna be a bigger number, and you're like, that didn't really do anything. Maybe I need more.
It's not gonna fix you.
No, and like I give the example, like, why are there so many billionaires just doing the craziest things with their money? They are chasing something or they're running away from something, but they think money is the solution. Yeah. But they have all the money in the world and they're still acting crazy.
Yeah, that's a big one.
That's a big one. It's not always going to be the thing that fixes it. It's not an all cure. It can help, but it's just a tool at the end of the day. So just don't lose sight of that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love that. That's a great answer. Taking things into like a bit more of a like action oriented, like practical place for things that people are struggling with right now. For those who feel like the cards are stacked against them, maybe they're living in a major city, you know, like Toronto, like New York, maybe they're making like 50 to 70,000, which isn't actually sustainable in a major city with the cost of living right now. And they're just getting by. But the idea of getting ahead, the idea of savings, the idea of having like 6 to 12 months in an emergency fund, the idea of investing, it feels like impossible and out of touch with their reality. What should they be thinking about in terms of how to actually start building wealth if they don't have as much abundance right now to spend?
Yeah. I'd say it's really important to, again, really identify how does money make you feel and your kind of money story so you can better understand maybe how you got to where you are and why you feel the way you feel. But then on the kind of practical side, it's really important to not think of like the big stuff before the little stuff. So we need to really start small and then build upon that. And so by, you know, starting small, that's sort of like, okay, let's take a look at what money is coming in, what money is going out. Is this sustainable or not? If it's not, then then that's where we should focus. We need to make more money, or we need to cut our spending, or ideally probably both. So that's also a big ask, because you're like, okay, well, that means what? Like getting a new job, There's but then that should be the number one focus.
Right. You can't do it all at once.
You can't do it all at once. So just pick one thing that you're like, okay, this is priority number one. Yeah. And then, you know, and like you kind of mentioned, the emergency fund, I'm always harping on that, because if you do not have cash in the bank, something can happen to throw a wrench in all of your plans and you're starting at ground zero again. So we need to make sure that the number one priority, even if you have debt, I always tell people, like, don't pay off your high interest debt or whatever. Like, you know, there's so many gurus out there like, pay off your debt first. You're like, no. We need cash in the bank first. Because if you don't have cash, something happens, you're getting further into debt. So you just undid all of the good that you did by paying off whatever debt you did.
Okay, so that's really good to know, because I think a lot of people are confused about what to do with especially higher interest debt. So just to reiterate, the priority should be
have that emergency
How
fund.
long
we need
would
that
you
cushion.
suggest? It can depend if you have kids or you're single or whatever.
It depends, but I do always give like
minimum?
3 to 6 months. Like, and just give yourself like 3 months. Okay, that is the goal. When you're starting from like nothing, we're just paycheck to paycheck. 1 month, and then another month, and then another month, until you're like, oh, okay, I'm starting to feel a little bit better, a little bit more secure, that if something happens, I've got some cash. And then again, continue to pay your debts, but just like the minimum balance, just like we're not going to be aggressively paying that off.
Yeah, until you have the emergency fund.
Exactly. Once that emergency fund is fully funded, you feel really good and comfortable and like secure, you've got that cushion, then we're going to take a look at that debt. We're going to take a look at, okay, what are the different debts? What are the interest rates? What are our options? Does it make sense to pay off the highest interest debt or the smallest balance? Or does it make more sense to consolidate the debts to get a lower interest? Let's see what our options are, and then make a plan for how to get out of that. And again, you got to be realistic. It is likely going to take you years depending on what the balance is. Yeah. Don't feel ashamed for that. That is, you know, look at some stats. That's pretty normal. And it is what it is. Yeah. But the key thing is there is an end date for you to be debt free. And that is what's going to kind of motivate you and create that momentum. And then once we do have this, debt repayment plan, again, I don't necessarily think that means, then you shouldn't be saving or you shouldn't be investing. It depends on everyone's situation. But what I saw so much, especially in my early blogging days, so it was really, debt bloggers were a really big thing back in the day. So many people would focus on getting out of debt. They'd get out of debt. And there's some of these like bloggers, like, look at me, I got out of debt. They'd get back into debt because they never created a savings habit.
Right.
They only created a really great debt repayment habit, but they didn't know how to save because they weren't doing it. And so we need to kind of do it at the same time, even if it's just like $10, $20, like whatever.
Set up
extra,
the system.
You set up that
habit.
system so you can, create that pattern. So once you are debt free, all you have to do is shift however much you were putting onto your debt into your savings goal, because you've already crafted that habit, which is, habits are the hardest thing to craft.
Yeah.
And so that's why I feel like sometimes it's about doing a mixture, not, do this and then do this and do this.
Yeah. And I love the approach of just looking at all of these things as habits, because it takes it away from being like your identity.
Yeah, exactly.
It takes it away from having it be like this bigger indication of who you are. And it's like, oh, it's just a habit. You just, and and habits are hard. So it's not just, but it becomes just an external action that you can get in the practice of following through
just
with.
Like anything in life. Like I always, tell people like, if you want to be fit, that's a habit. And especially if you've been like, I haven't been to the gym in years. That's a hard habit to start. It's really hard at the beginning, but then you just add on, you work out once a week and then maybe twice a week. And this, again, it can take years. Like give yourself some grace. It's going to take some time.
Yeah. I love that. That's really, really good advice. My last question on finance, and probably the one that's on everyone's mind right now, is given the current state of the economy right now, looming recession, tariffs further driving up the cost of living, a lot of just economic uncertainty and job security uncertainty in the short term. Because obviously I think most people have a good grasp on like if you're doing long-term investing, you don't necessarily need to panic right now if it's long-term. But in the short term, is there anything we should be doing differently with our money right now than maybe we would have a few years ago when we weren't in the current shit show that we're in? Are there any specific like actions or advice that you think people should consider for the current climate in 2025?
It doesn't matter what's going on in the world. We need to focus on you and what your needs and your priorities are. And so sometimes that means you have to shift some priorities. So maybe if you're like, I'm planning on going, to travel around the world. I've been saving up for, a while for that. Maybe right now isn't the right moment. Or especially if you want to like travel around the States or something like that. You're like, maybe this isn't the right time. Maybe we need to hit pause and then take a look at some other priorities. But in terms of like, should I invest differently? Should I save differently? Should I do something different with my money? Well, what was your original financial plan? And has what's going on changed any of those priorities? Maybe it has, but maybe it hasn't. So maybe it is about hitting pause for something right now. Like, maybe it's not the best time to make a big purchase that isn't a complete need. Maybe right now is the time to sit back, see how things kind of go through. But in general, I'm still telling people, just stay calm, focus on you and what you were doing before this. If you feel really insecure with your job or your business, if you run a small business, let's take a look to make sure we've got all of our ducks in a row, that if we do lose our job, we've got that emergency fund. We know that we can get into EI. We've got an action plan for how to get a new job, all of these things. So maybe, and that'll make you feel like, oh, good. So if the worst happens, I've already got my plan B. I already know what I'm going to do.
We're doing like recession proofing.
Exactly. And man, I feel like we've been recession proofing since 2008.
Since we were born.
It's never a bad idea just to do an inventory of what's going on in your finances. Are there any blind spots or areas that maybe you need to pay more attention to and then focus on that? But
investment wise, is it still like kind of the best protocol to be like dollar cost averaging into the market? Or are you like buy the dip, or like is it?
You know how I hate when people are like, I'm about the dip. You're like, you don't know when the dip is. You don't know the dip. You only know it when it's over. So I would say I don't love market timing. I'm a very boring passive investor. I'm all about dollar cost averaging. I'm more of a lump sum investor, but that's just how my finances are set up running a business. I like invest a few times a year and then don't touch it, don't look at it.
Got it.
But in general, I'm always just like sticking with my plan. So it always comes down to what is your financial plan, your investment plan, and then stick to it. But if there are some things that maybe that doesn't make sense anymore because of what's going on, then don't do that, and then shift priorities, shift kind of what you're doing. But yeah, when it comes to investing, I'm just constantly telling people, don't touch it. Don't look at it.
Yeah.
Don't panic.
Don't panic.
So many people I've seen over the past couple of weeks have sold everything.
Yeah.
And then it went back up.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like,
you're only going to lose everything if you sell it right now.
Exactly. It's like, we have no idea what is going to happen day to day because of, it's just unpredictable.
Yeah.
It's so unpredictable. So don't make plans off of what you think could happen because it may not happen. Like I was talking to someone recently and they're like, should I shift my portfolio so I, sell all my US stocks and just focus more on China because I think China is going to be the next. Don't make a decision based off of what you heard or what you think could happen.
Yeah.
I have no idea what could happen.
Yeah.
And what if you're wrong? So I'm
It's
all of
always
the
a gamble.
mind, stick to your plan, invest in the entire world. Don't panic. Don't let emotions make any of your financial decisions. And if you're feeling really anxious and fearful when it comes to your money, find out what's triggered those feelings. Is it reading lots of the financial news, going on social media too much? Maybe it's time to step back and then focus on what are things that are within your control and what are some things that can help you in your life that are kind of ways to ground yourself. Yeah. What are the good things that are happening in your life? Maybe we should focus on those more than worrying about potential things that could happen. Because again, I remember just so vivid. It was only 5 years ago that COVID and everyone's like, it's a zombie apocalypse. Yeah. Everyone, I'm moving to the country because there's going to be less zombies. Yeah. And you're like, well, 5 years later, was that a good choice or not? You made a choice based off of an irrational fear of, well, the city's going to be too busy or whatever the case is. And I think it's always best to make decisions with a clear level head.
Good advice. Love that. My last question that I've asked you before when you were last on the show, and I'm curious to listen back and see if it has changed, but I'd love to know, what is one adulting thing or skill that you wish you had learned in school that would have really equipped you for being a grown-ass human?
Oh, I have no idea what I said back then, but what I probably would say now is I wish I learned how to advocate for myself and negotiate. So man, if I look back at it, and I'm good at it now because I've had to be, but I always thought I just have to take whatever the job is going to offer or whatever the offer is offering. Yeah. And instead of asking for more, whereas I know a lot of people, especially men, I feel like they learned this somewhere and I certainly didn't. And so I wish I could go back, and there was a class where it's like, oh, this is how to ask for what you're worth, what you need, what you want. Because then I'd be in a, higher tier probably in my career, my finances, all that kind of stuff.
That's a great answer. That's such an important skill. I love that. Yes. Thank you so much for being here. This was such a great conversation. I learned so much. I really learned a lot from your book. And please share with everyone where they can follow you, where they can buy your book, and everything
let's
they
show
need to
the
know.
book while we're here.
A moment for the book.
Video. Hello, Everything But Money, out now. So, you can find a bunch of links that I put nice and organized on my website, jessicamoorhouse.com/book, but you can find it on Amazon, Indigo, indie bookstores. It's also an audiobook that I narrate, which is really exciting. Amazing. So you can find it everywhere. And like I mentioned, if you go to jessicamoorhouse.com/book, a lot more info about the book, some book extras if you want some like extra videos or audio and worksheets to help you really dive into some of the action-oriented parts of the book. You may want to check that out.
Amazing. Everything will be in the show notes below. So thank you so much, Jessica. This was so fun.